Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm Stacey Graves with Edit Design House. We're interior designers and we love making special spaces for our clients. Today, we are going to chat about how to elevate a living room. You know, there's a difference between a space that is lived in and you love it, but also the difference between a space that has a ton of different attention and it feels really, really thoughtfully designed. So today I'm going to talk about some of the details that go behind the scenes, and we're starting off with scale. One of the biggest indicators we find when we're walking into a space that hasn't been intentionally designed is that a lot of times things can be out of scale, especially things being under scale. So sometimes you're going to walk into a space, the chairs are too small, the sofa's too small, the rug very frequently is too small, and the artwork is too small. I think when people are picking things out, they worry like, I don't know if that's going to be too big. I'm going to tell you 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be too big, and that overscale is going to be a little bit more helpful than underscale. Now, of course, you don't want your pieces to not fit in the space. So when it comes to a sofa, you want to make sure that there's proper traffic around it and everything. But we want to make sure that you don't have kind of apartment size furniture in a full size house. Of course, if you're furnishing an apartment, that's a totally different story. But we want to talk about scale. So not only the actual physical dimensions of the piece, but you kind of want to look at the details of the piece too. So if you have a chair, for instance, that has really scrawny thin arms and scrawny thin legs, that can come off kind of modern, but sometimes what that just looks like is a cheap piece of furniture. So be really mindful when you're looking at things like furniture, like the arms and legs of furniture. You want to make sure that they're not too spindly and not too tiny. And the one trick is, if you do have a piece of furniture that does have kind of really thin details, you want to be able to offset that with something that's on the opposite side of the spectrum. So if something's up on nice thin legs, it feels kind of dainty and it feels kind of delicate. You want to have some other pieces in the room that are a little bit more structured and massive and a little bit more straight and maybe come all the way down to the floor. That balance is going to be really important in helping the space feel a little bit higher end. So you don't want to have like everything up on spindly legs, or it's going to look kind of like the furniture is floating up above the floor. Sectionals and big grand sofas, those are all pieces that are going to fill a room nicely. So especially if you have a nice big great room, make sure you don't have tiny sofas or tiny chairs in the space. You want them to kind of fill the space nicely. Okay, so along those lines, when we're talking about the space itself, we love having a little bit of architectural depth when we're working with a room. So you can have a space that's 4 flat walls and there it is. You can put anything, the details are endless. But if we were able to get into that room and do just a little bit of trim or millwork, that is going to add a ton of layering into your space, and that's going to feel a lot more thoughtful and a lot more intentional. It's going to give that really, really quick high-end luxury feel, especially because a lot of homes don't necessarily take the budget and take the time to do thoughtful millwork. So if you walk into a space that does have those details, it's very instantly going to elevate the look and the feel of that space. Another thing that's going to go along with that is making sure that you've got a lot of texture in the room. So we're talking about architectural texture, right? That could be crown molding, that could be an arch, that could be trim and millwork. Also thinking about the textures in the finishes of the room is going to go a long way. So if we add everything slippery and smooth, it's going to feel very one-dimensional. And on the same note, if you had everything like woolly and fuzzy and cozy, that's also still going to feel very one-dimensional. So what we're looking at is having some contrast between the two. You may want to have like a smooth leather somewhere and then maybe like a textured pillow or something that has a little bit more detail. Not only does it have to be like a physical texture that you can touch, but you can also be thinking about pattern as a form of texture. So perhaps you have plain colors on your sofa and on your rug. Maybe you want a chair that has a nice big pattern on it. If that feels too scary for you, you can always introduce some pattern in a pillow. One thing we want to think about too is when you're playing with pattern, you want to play with scale. So you don't want everything to be big pattern, or small pattern, small pattern. Try to pick a little bit of big, a little bit of small. The goal is having balance. Think about maybe flavors in a recipe. You don't want only sweet, you want some salty. And as you play with those different flavors on your plate, the same thing is going to happen with playing with textures in the room. So next we're going to talk about lighting. It's one of the things that goes such a long way in any space that's been thoughtfully designed. We always make sure in a house that we have overhead lighting, right? That's kind of a default. But one of the things that's going to really, really help it feel thoughtful and inviting and rich and luxurious is being able to have some other layers of lighting. In a living room, it's super easy to introduce lamps. So that can be table lamps, That can be floor lamps. One other fun layer is being able to introduce an art light. So if you've got like a fireplace moment with a piece of art above it or a really prominent piece of art, do a little bit of an investment and put in an art light right above that piece. You can actually get art lights for a really affordable price. They can also be really stunning and really incredible. But just the act of having an art light can make the space feel really interesting and thoughtful and dynamic. And it's going to be one of those things that you don't see everywhere. So when you do see it, you walk in the room, it's almost really subtle. You almost don't even notice it, but you walk into the room and think, oh, this is a really nice space. In my house, I love to be able to turn off the big light at night and be able to just leave on the lamps or early in the morning. So one thing about our space is you don't want to just walk into it and have it be a nice space in that moment. You want to be able to enjoy it at other times of the day or other times of the season and be able to enjoy it differently. We want our spaces to flex with us, just like you would like a best friend to flex with you, right? You don't want someone who only can party or only can travel or only can be responsible and polite. You want someone who has a little bit of different personality details to it. So our room is still going to be functioning kind of that same way, where we want to be able to be soft and calm or high lit and functional, be able to read a book, having those different things. That's one fun way to think about a room in making it functional and more elevated and luxurious for you. The very last thing that I want to talk about is just having some overall cohesion. So one thing that's important with the space is you don't want it to be too chaotic. Try and kind of think of a theme. So maybe we're working with like cool color tones, or maybe we're working with rich color tones, or maybe we're working with neutrals. You can have a few exceptions to the rule as you're going through the space, but overall, once you kind of have that vision painted in your mind, try and lean into that same vision throughout the whole space. And you can have a couple of contrasting pieces that create balance, but thinking about that space fully cohesive is going to make it feel a lot higher end and a lot more thoughtful and intentional. One really easy way to do this is, of course, having inspiration images of successful places that have already done something like that. But a fun thing you can do if you have a little bit of an abstract mind that you can think creatively about things is just doing an inspiration board. So you can put together a few images that represent the vibe of a space. So maybe you want something that's like really sophisticated and charming. You could have like a very well-tailored men's suit and a picture of a horse and some brass details and a fancy car. That's going to help you visually make choices for the space and be able to think, hey, this is the next piece I want to introduce to the space. Does it lean into that vibe or that vision that I've created for myself? So again, that was an option for something kind of like masculine and sophisticated. Maybe you want something kind of like ocean and breezy, right? So you're going to put a few different images down on a board. It makes the process really fun to think through and be able to say, okay, now every choice that I make for this space, is that exuding that same vibe and that same vision that I'm looking for this space? So there's a whole bunch of tips on how to elevate a living room. Of course, reach out to us if you need any help on anything. There's tons of good inspiration on our website, editdesignhouse.com. You can find us on Instagram at editdesignhouse. Remember that elevated spaces are quiet, cohesive, and deeply intentional. Please like and subscribe and join us next time.